Akwaba family. Welcome back to Africa TV, where we connect Africa with her global diaspora and keep you informed about the political, economic, and cultural developments shaping the future of the African world. I'm your host, Akusia Asante, and today we're talking about something that could become one of the most significant Pan-African developments of our generation: the movement toward a visa-free Africa and Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama's broader vision of reconnecting Africa with the Caribbean and the African diaspora. Imagine this: a Ghanaian traveling to Kenya, a South African traveling to Senegal, an African entrepreneur traveling across the continent looking for investment opportunities, and eventually a stronger travel, trade, and economic bridge connecting Africans on the continent with our brothers and sisters throughout the Caribbean, without the visa barriers that have divided African people for generations. That is the vision, and Ghana is attempting to help lead the way. On May 25th, 2026, Africa Day, President John Dramani Mahama launched Ghana's new electronic visa system. But there was an even bigger announcement. Under Ghana's new policy, African passport holders traveling to Ghana for tourism or business are able to obtain their travel authorization without paying visa fees. The African Union welcomed Ghana's move, along with Togo's visa-free policy, describing these measures as an important step toward African integration. Think about the significance of that. For generations, Africans have often found it easier to travel outside the African continent than to travel between African nations. That is one of the great contradictions of post-colonial Africa. We talk about African unity, we talk about Pan-Africanism, we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area. But without this new policy, how can we truly create a united African marketplace if African people themselves cannot move freely across Africa? The African Continental Free Trade Area, headquartered right here in Accra, Ghana, is designed to create an enormous integrated African market. That is why the African Union itself has said that free movement is directly connected to the success of continental free trade, tourism, investment, labor mobility, and economic integration. Ghana has also been strengthening its relationship with the Caribbean and the wider African diaspora. And that is particularly important to us here at Back to Africa TV. Because when we talk about Africa, we don't only mean the geographical continent, we are talking about an African world. And this raises a much bigger question. What would happen if Africa and the Caribbean began treating one another as members of an interconnected African economic family? That is Pan-Africanism moving beyond speeches. But unfortunately, a completely borderless Africa has not yet been achieved. Visa requirements and immigration rules still vary significantly among African countries. The African Union has been pursuing its free movement of persons agenda and the concept of an African passport as part of Agenda 2063. But implementation has been slower than many Pan-Africanists hoped. That means Ghana's decision is important because somebody has to demonstrate that greater African mobility is actually possible. One nation opens its borders, another nation follows. And gradually, the political idea of African unity becomes something ordinary African citizens can actually experience. For those of us in the diaspora, we should pay very close attention to this movement, because the next logical conversation is, where does the African diaspora fit into Africa's integration project? Ghana has already established itself as one of the leading countries building bridges with the diaspora, from the year of return to beyond the return, citizenship initiatives, reparations, advocacy, and expanding relationships with Caribbean governments. So the question becomes, could we eventually see an Africa where people of African descent throughout the diaspora have easier pathways for travel, residency, investment, and economic participation? That conversation deserves to happen. Family, the borders dividing Africa today were largely created during the colonial period. Our ancestors did not draw those borders. European colonial powers did. So perhaps one of the greatest projects of 21st century Pan-Africanism will be figuring out how Africans can overcome those artificial barriers, politically, economically, and socially. Tell us what you think in the comments. And if you believe it's time to reconnect Africa and her diaspora, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Back to Africa TV, and share this report with the family. One Africa, one diaspora, one African family. This is Back to Africa TV. It's time to come home. Peace and power, family, and we'll see you on the next report.